Hi everyone and welcome back to the channel, and today we're taking a look at a really interesting series of bottles, and that is the Black Bowmore series, and we've got a bottle of Black Bowmore up on the cask with us here. The Black Bowmore series, it's an interesting one because it was one of the first super premium releases that was ever released from any really distillery. It was sort of like head and shoulders above the rest at the time when it was released. And funnily enough, it's possible to say that it's been eclipsed by some other releases now in terms of pricing, but you know that's another point. The fact is that the Black Bowmore series is a really interesting series of bottles. And well, what's it made of? What's the whiskey that's inside these bottles? Well, it was all distilled in 1964. Now, some of the bottles say that it was distilled on the 5th of November 1964, but that's contradictory to the information that's on the inside of this box on the slip paper here. It says the first distillate of 1964 was filled into Oloroso sherry casks of exceptional quality and laid to mature deep in the distillery vaults below sea level. So if this is saying that it was the first distillate of 1964, and some of the editions say that it was the 5th of November 1964, which is right. So I don't know the answer to that. So if you know the answer to that, get in the comments and let us know, because we're all about sharing information and sharing knowledge. So if you know that answer, I'd be really, really happy to hear from you. Now, the series itself was actually quite a big series. There was over just under 7,000 bottles released as part of the Black Bowmore series. I think it was 6,798 released in total. So if you do the maths on this, it would equate to 4,758 litres of liquid, give or take, that was bottled, which you would think would be around 20 hogsheads, 20 250 litre hogsheads. However, that doesn't take into account the Angel's share that would have happened, because the first one that was bottled was 29 years old, so the youngest whiskey in the Black Bowmore series is 29 years old. So let's do a quick bit of maths here. So if you take a standard hogshead, 250 litres, times 0.99 to the power of 29, so that would give you 1% evaporation compounded over 29 years. That would leave you with about 187 litres left in that hogshead after 29 years, and therefore you would need about 25 hogsheads worth of whiskey in order to produce the entire Black Bowmore series. Now, the reason why we went with 1% evaporation rather than the 2 or 3%, which is more common in Scotland, is that these casks were matured in the #1 vaults at the Bowmore distillery, which is beneath sea level. It's very wet, it's very cold, and the evaporation is quite low. So we've got this bottle here with us, so let's dive into 4 things that you might not know about the Black Bowmore series. So the first thing to note is that it was cheap whiskey. The first release was released in 1993 and it cost £80 a bottle. So that would have grossed Bowmore £160,000 in sales from 2,000 bottles. So there's 2,000 bottles in that edition. The second edition was released in 1994 and that was £90 a bottle. So again, grossing £180,000 for Bowmore, and that was again another 2,000 bottles. And then this final edition here, again, we refer back in here. It says, it was the proprietor's intention to release 2,000 bottles of this exceptional example of Bowmore Islay whiskey in 1995. However, the Angels share have already taken their share of this unique malt whiskey, and it is only possible to produce 1,812 bottles as a final edition. So this is the third edition. It was a final edition. It says so on the box here. It says it's a final edition. It says on the inside of the box there, it's the final edition. We're going to come back to this point in a second. And it was released at £100 a bottle in 1995, so grossing £180,000 worth of sales. So for £80 to £100, given that these editions 1, 2, 3 are probably worth £10,000 to £15,000 on average at the moment, was very cheap. But that would be misunderstanding the market, because you've got to remember, like in 1996, Private Eye came out at £36 a bottle. Releasing whiskey at £80, £90, £100 in the early 1990s was incredibly high. It was a high purchase price, and they didn't all sell out very quickly. By no means did they sell out very quickly. There was still quite a lot around several years later. In fact, one of our customers was able to go over to duty free and pick up, I think he picked up 2 cases of Black Bowmore off the shelf for £100 a bottle. And when you consider that they're worth £10,000 to £15,000 a bottle on average, you think, wow. So it was cheap whiskey by today's standard, and it was very expensive whiskey for the time, especially because you've got to remember that the context of single malt at that time. It wasn't this explosive, flipper, consumer, investor driven market that it is today. The Black Bowmore series is the gift that keeps on giving, especially to Bowmore, because as we've said, this was the 3rd edition. It was the final edition. It says right here it's the final edition. It says right here that the Angels have taken so much of the share that this is going to be their last share and their last bottle. But 12 years later, they must have just been rummaging around, the number 1 vaults and thought, oh, we found another one. Ken, come over here. We got another Bowmore. We got another Black Bowmore. Because in 2007, they released another edition. Now, this one was a big jump in price. This was now released at £2,400 per bottle in an edition of 827 bottles. Now you're looking at a £2 million gross sale from all of those bottles. But not satisfied with that final edition, so the 4th edition, the new final edition, in 2014, so another 7 years later, when everybody had forgot that they talked about final editions and stuff like that, they released another one. And this time it was a 50-year-old bottling, and they sold 159 bottles, I think it was. And this was I think it was released for £16,000 a bottle this time. So you've seen the original release in 1993 at £80, up to the 50-year-old release in 2014 for £16,000 a bottle. So again, grossing £2.5 million from that sale. And then, not to be done with it any more final editions, they came back with one more. So the next thing that you might not know is that there was another final edition, and this was the DB5 edition that was released in association with Aston Martin in 2020. Now, this was a 25 bottle limited release for £25,000 a bottle. So again, we'll follow that maths theme, £625,000 in gross sales from that edition. Now, what's interesting about this is that the new DB5 edition that was released at £25,000 a bottle contains this whiskey. It's the final edition. So the DB5 edition was a rebottling of this final edition. So it's the same whiskey in both bottles. Now this brings us on to a really interesting point. We'll put on screen now a result from the DB5 edition that was sold at Whisky Hammer in March 2021, and it sold for £81,000. In March 2021 as well, Whisky Auctioneer sold a bottle of the final edition for £11,000. So the same whiskey in 2 different bottles and boxes has a £70,000 difference in price on the open market. Now this is a point that we sort of keep coming home to on this channel, is that, like, let's be frank, no one gives a damn about the whiskey. It's all about the packaging, the status, and everything else that brings to you. It's like the polar opposite of wine. So the way that wine accrues value is if a critic, like the Wine Advocate, give a wine 100 points, the price of that wine increases significantly. Likewise, if the critic scores start coming down, the price starts coming down. But with whiskey, the quality has got no impact on the value. So for instance, this final edition you can buy at auction for, call it 10-15 grand, but the same whiskey in a fancy bottle released by Aston Martin in association with Bowmore will cost you £81,000, which is just absurd. Which brings us on to our 4th and final point. So we've implied already that the same whiskey in 2 different bottles can have 2 significantly different prices. So the final edition, £11,000, the DB5 edition, £81,000. It's the same whiskey. Why is the price different? Well, we know because people like status symbols. But another interesting point to note with the Black Bowmore is that Serge Valentin at Whisky Fun, and we talk about Whisky Fun a lot because it's kind of like the gold standard of critic reviews online for whiskey. And he's tried the first, second, third and fourth editions of the Black Bowmore, and in his opinion, which is pretty much unshakable really, is that the first edition was the best, and I think he summarises it as being the first edition is in another dimension compared to the others. So the first edition gets 96 points, the second, third and fourth only get 91 points, and he's not tried the fifth. So, you know, why not? If someone's got the fifth edition open, get Serge Dram over so that he can complete his tasting notes. I think we'd all be interested to see those. But the point is that this whiskey was at its pinnacle at a 29-year-old, and arguably the quality continued to diminish as it went on in the cask. So it just goes to highlight that aging a whiskey for longer and longer doesn't necessarily produce a better whiskey. This might have been a 100-point whiskey maybe when it was 23 or 25 years old. We just don't know. But it's interesting to note how quality has little bearing on price, or little sort of steer towards when to bottle in this industry. So there we have it. We've hopefully taught you 4 things about the Black Bowmore series that you might not have known already. And in the last video with the number plates, we did a competition. So the best comment would win a dram of a Macallan, 1970s, 10-year-old. Where is that? You're here. And we're going to put you in the comments below who won that one. There was someone saying about the best accessory is a friend to drink it with, and we completely agree with that. So I've forgotten your handle now. We'll put you in the comments, we'll tag you, so get in touch and we'll get a dram of this off over to you. Now, in the spirit of keeping things moving forward in that vein, what have we got on the back bar? So we've got a Bowmore 12-year-old dumpy from the 1980s. So why not? If you want a dram of this Bowmore 12-year-old from the 1980s, let us know what you think is the most overrated bottle of whiskey on the market, because I think the DB5 edition has to rate as one of the most overrated bottles. But if you've got your own thoughts about that, get in the comments and let us know.